Manipur. I'm a key member of the ARC Advanced Research Consortium Library and Archives core committee. Today, I'm delighted to welcome Josiah Medin from Trinity College Dublin, who's the speaker of the day and who's going to give a talk on a lecture on historical sound change in Meiteilon from early text to the present. Before we dive into the lecture, I wanted to I'll give you a brief introduction to ARC. It stands for Advanced Research Consortium. It became a public library and archive in 2022. It's home to hundreds of books, some of them dated far back as the 16th century. It provides reading space and a loan facility of 3 books at a time at a nominal fee of just 200 rupees per year. And I would also like to introduce my co-host of the day, Dr. Babina Chagungbam, who again is also a member of the Library and Archive core committee. Babina is a performer dancer of Manipuri Ras Leela, and she holds a PhD from JNU Delhi, in which she looked at Jagoi Ras, or the Ras Leela dance, as a cultural repertoire and an embodiment of socio-political contestations. Babina, over to you.
Thank you, Dar Nepal. And I would like to take this moment to introduce our speaker for today's lecture, Josiah Medin, who is a PhD candidate at the Trinity Center for Asian Studies, Trinity College Dublin. And Josiah is interested in the historical development of Tibeto-Burman language. And in his research, he is trying to combine the descriptive linguistics, historical phonology, palaeography, and textual criticism to describe and translate manuscript texts from pre-colonial Manipur, Northeast India. And Josiah's thesis will constitute a comprehensive, descriptive, and historical grammar of Old Meiteilon. So we would proceed to Josiah's presentation now, which would run roughly for about 45 minutes. And we would take a short break of 2 minutes, and then come back again for an interactive session for around 30 minutes, where we would welcome any questions, comments, or feedbacks, or anything that the audience wants to share. So over to you, Josiah.
Thank you so much. Yeah, so that was a very good introduction. I really appreciate it. So my presentation is entitled Historical Sound Change in Meiteilon, from early text to the present. So first we're going to start off with a presentation roadmap. See if we can, there we go. So it's going to include the following sections. It might seem long, but I'm sure it'll go by very fast, so no worries there. So first we're going to talk about what is historical linguistics. So historical linguistics is a subfield of linguistics that seeks to study the earlier forms of languages through the examination of their descendants and study the change of language over time. Most historical linguists tend to work on specific families, but there are various people who also try to work on methodological concerns, such as how do languages change across time and space, regardless of their family. This is done by reconstructing what ancestral forms of known languages were like, and then trying to classify languages into families, which all come from a common source that we call a proto-language. These proto-languages are almost always hypothetical or theoretical. They're reconstructed based on something called the comparative method, which we'll talk about later. But there are a few proto-languages that are actually written down. Unfortunately, Proto-Tibeto-Burman is not one of them. So note that historical linguistics is not about preserving the correct forms or the traditional forms. It's a descriptive science rather than a prescriptive science. So we're not trying to tell people how to speak. We're just trying to determine how they actually did in the past. So there are crucial differences between English and literature studies and linguistics. So English and literature studies are not always prescriptive, but they often can be. Linguistics is descriptive, so we study the features of the language, not what it should have, as I previously said. And we don't acknowledge an objective category of correctness for native speakers. Dialects and non-standard varieties are just as valid as standard forms, and which form ends up becoming the standard is usually due to historical factors that are in some sense arbitrary. Usually these also depend on existing power structures, which are highly variable across time and space. And I will not be trying to propose correct forms for old or modern Meiteilon, but trying to describe how I think people spoke in the past from available evidence. So one of the most fundamental principles of historical linguistics is something called the regularity of sound change. So it was discovered by a group of Germans in the second half of the 19th century, and it's called der Ausnahmslosigkeit der Lautgesetze, which means literally the exceptionlessness of sound change. You don't need to memorize that, but that's the original word they used. And what this means is that when a consonant or a vowel undergoes a sound change, it will undergo that sound change in all cases. So in all words that have the same conditioning environment. So if a sound changes before a certain vowel in one word, we expect it to change before that vowel in all words. Now, stress and tone and other things like that can make conditioning environments different. So you have to be very sure that two words actually have the same conditioning environment. And this methodology also seeks to explain apparent irregularities by other means, such as analogy or borrowing. So analogy is when basically you can form a ratio of x to y is sort of, z to a, right? So drive, drove, dive, dove. The old past tense of dive was dived, but it was remodeled based on the word drove, because speakers found a pattern in the verb conjugation. And this can also result in seemingly irregular changes, but they're not actually irregular. This is just a different process. So this theory has had a lot of predictive power. So Mycenaean Greek, which is Greek from the Bronze Age, it was discovered with a class of consonants called labiovelars, which is like qua and gua, based on the available linear B script, exactly where we expected from reconstructions of Greek based on the various dialects of ancient Greek. In Classic Maya, which is the earliest attested Mayan language from Mexico, was deciphered in the 1950s to 1970s, and exhibits archaic features that were reconstructed previously for earlier stages of the Maya languages before they actually knew about Classic Maya. There's also a language called Hittite, which was shown to have a class of consonants called laryngeals. They were probably something like a voiceless uvular fricative, exactly where it was expected from reconstructions based on effects on neighboring vowels and root structure in related languages. So not in Hittite itself. This was before Hittite was discovered. So as a result of this, we can show that sound changes are actually regular in related languages if they descend from the same phonological environment in the proto-language. So here you have an example from Lyle Campbell. This is Finnic, which is a group of languages from Northern Europe. And in Finnish and Estonian, you can see the correspondences are highly regular. You have juoni, meaning line or direction in Finnish, and joon in Estonian, and huoli and hol, right? So the final E gets deleted and the long O corresponds to an uo, for example. And this is Indo-European. This is another language family, the language family of English and Sanskrit and Latin and Greek and Hittite. And you can tell that in all of these languages where they have a P, English has an F in basic vocabulary that we know is not borrowed. So the word for foot was something like bed or bod, and in English it's foot with an F. And note that P and F are both sounds that you make with your lips, and T and D are both sounds that you make with your tongue. The only difference between T and D is that D is voiced and T is voiceless. And you have the same correspondence for father and fire. This is not Latin. This is Umbrian, which is a language related to Latin that has pier. And in Hittite, you have pachor with those two laryngeal consonants. So you can see these patterns hold across basic vocabulary that we know is unlikely to be borrowed because these words are used more frequently on a daily basis, right? Every culture has fire, so it would be a little bit unusual for a culture to borrow the word for fire from somebody else. So It also depends on the law of parsimony. Two hypotheses have equal prior probabilities or explanatory power, then the simple one is better. So it's more likely that English changed P to F than all of the other languages in that chart changed an original F to a P. And note that German also has Fuß and Vater and Feuer, which look a lot like the English forms. And this can be used to establish that English and German are more closely related than the other languages. So these correspondences further prove that sound change is regular, and we can use them to establish branches, like with English and German. Note that Latin and Greek A also corresponded back there to Sanskrit A in words like pod, padi, for example. So this principle holds across all language families at highly statistically significant rates, but it only applies to phonology, so the sounds of languages. It has not been possible to demonstrate a similar operation of rules for morphological changes, nor for semantic or syntactic changes. And it is this which leads us to the conclusion that sound changes provide both the foundation and the main premise upon which comparative linguistics is built. So this is a quote from Backus and Devan, who are two of the most prominent Indo-Europeanists, and they wrote the introductory textbook on Indo-European linguistics. And this is a really good articulation of the fact that anyone in historical linguistics is almost invariably going to have to depend on historical phonology to an extent to actually conduct their research. So morphological change, which includes compounding and derivation of new words from words that already exist, or syntactic change, things like word order, semantic change, changes in meaning, which happen all the time. These don't apply to this methodology, but there are other ways of determining plausibility, most of which will not actually come up in this presentation. So please note, I am not trying to propose a correct number of letters for Meiteilon or propose a new transcription system. The transcription system I'm using is almost entirely derived from Sumrangol Sharma, his 2006 dictionary, which is available online. But I've made some changes and additions to accommodate the different orthographic features of the texts, because his dictionary is almost entirely geared toward the modern spoken language. So now we're going to zoom out a bit, and we're going to say, now that we've found out how people classify languages, well, Meiteilon is classified using this methodology as a Tibeto-Burman language. The language family is called Sino-Tibetan, which includes Tibeto-Burman and Chinese, or the Sinitic languages for people who believe in this two-branching model, but there are other models too. It's clearly related to other Tibeto-Burman languages, which we can see by examining morphology and basic vocabulary. But a lot of the shared innovations can be a bit unclear. And it's often classified as a distinct branch within Tibeto-Burman without very close relatives. So this means that it is a Tibeto-Burman language, but it's unclear what its closest relatives are. So for now, we're just going on the safe side and leaving it unclassified within the family. So as a Tibeto-Burman language with unclear close relatives. So it is my theory and the theory of a lot of other people. I got this from a long tradition in historical linguistics where we try to look at the oldest attested forms. Attested means written down and readable. That these Old Meiteilon forms might help illuminate the more precise classification of the language. So which other Tibeto-Burman languages are closest based on shared innovations? Studying the old language may help indicate innovations that have been obscured by more recent sound changes. So an innovation is like, remember, changing F to P in English and German. Every language has distinct innovations that set it apart from the other members of its family. Since sound change is regular, understanding sound change helps to figure out the older ancestors of modern words. So it's clear that Old Meiteilon did not have contrastive voicing, and I think this is something that a lot of Meitei people are very aware of and reflects a good knowledge of some aspects of how the language was spoken in the past. So voice consonants are things like ba, da, ga, ja, which are made by vibrating your vocal cords. And voiceless consonants are made not by vibrating your vocal cords. So that's like ba, da, ga, ta, ka, sa. And there's a lot of evidence that proves the idea that Old Meiteilon probably didn't have contrastive voicing. So Buchanan, who was a British dignitary, I believe, he wrote in 1799. He was writing down a bunch of words in languages that he called the Burma Empire, but it was languages from Northeast India and Myanmar. And he transcribed the word for earth or country as Lai Pauk. Probably the AU there is an aw sound, so Lai Pauk, with a P, orthographic P, instead of a B, which is what it has now. And Buchanan did not speak Meiteilon. It seems like he would have tried to capture the pronunciation without knowledge of the conditioned allophones. So if the P was actually being voiced between vowels, it seems like he would have picked that up because he wouldn't have the knowledge that this was originally a P or this was a P in other cases if it wasn't in between vowels, right? So early loans also have initial voiceless stops. The word Bangal, which means Manipuri Muslim or Muslim, it's an ethnic group in modern-day Manipur, is probably derived from Middle Bengali Bangala, because these people originally came from Bengal, the Bengal area, which is where Islam was introduced into sort of Northeast India from. And in Middle Bengali, this has a ba. It's written, for those of you who can read the Bangla script, you can see that this is written with a ba. So we have a text from Parat's Chetro Kumpapa, which says Bangal Achangpa Kaipikti, which means probably just all the living Bangals. And according to Singh et al.'s Manipuri Longai, Kaipik is an old word for all. And that word actually comes up a lot in older texts. But this word Bangal is pretty good evidence that there was not voicing at the time, because if there was, then it seems like they would have borrowed it with a B word initially. Also, most morphemes and roots that now appear with voice consonants between vowels or after nasals. So nasals are sounds like ma, na, nga that you use your nose for. There's no closure in your nose when you're making a nasal sound. These are written with their voiceless equivalents. So, for example, there we go. So in Hemchandra's facsimile of the Nume Kappa, he writes Hai tapara, which probably means didn't I say or isn't it said? And now I think people pronounce this as Haidabara, right? And I think it means the exact same thing now. And because sounds often change in symmetrical natural classes, all voiceless consonants becoming voiced between vowels is very natural, because vowels are also voiced. And it's likely that the voicing of all voiceless stops then occurred roughly simultaneously. However, in the same text, there are some uncertainties because Buchanan writes along as Asamba, which has a B, and it seems like this might be evidence that voicing after nasals happened first, or alternatively that he was speaking to a different person that had voicing, because it's common that a lot of speakers will not adopt a sound change simultaneously. And I don't like to use this word because it's a little bit offensive, I've heard, but this is what Ngoma calls these dialects. They're called Loy dialects, so we're talking the dialects of Sekmai and Andhro and sort of places like that. They still don't have any voicing in either place. So I'll show you an example later on of that. But most of these dialects seem not to have any voicing at all, except for in loanwords. However, there are a few older texts that definitely use voice stop letters. So this is the Kontojam Lairembi inscription, which Bahadur and Gunindra Singh have written about in their epigraphical records of Manipur. And here they write his, her, master / lord as Ma Bhu Ki with a voiced aspirate Bhu, which you can see right in the middle. This is very curious because in the modern language, this would be Mapugi. So even though it was written with a letter for the voice consonant, it doesn't show voicing where the modern language has it. So I don't think this is necessarily strong evidence that Old Meiteilon had voicing. There's also cases like in the Ningtolo Lampupa, You may know this text by a different name, but this is the name that Chanem Hemchandra has decided to call it. So I use that name. And he says Nurabi, Nurabi na. So the lady as a subject with the agentive suffix. And Nurabi means female lady, or the lady who takes her part on the last day of the Lai Hauroba, according to Singh et al. So this is also clear evidence of the existence of a B consonant in an old text. However, the exact same text, much later on, actually only a few folios later, spells the same word as Nurabi with a b, with a letter ba. So perhaps by this time, voiced allophones, non-contrastive variants developed, but were not yet contrastive. Or some scribes had different dialects. Some of them said Nurabi, some of them said Nurabi, or they simply could not distinguish between the P and B in between vowels, between the sounds made by the letters. So they use them interchangeably. This is very common with people who speak languages that don't have contrastive voicing. So the phenomenon we just saw of writing what are now voice consonants with voiceless stops is extremely common. But there are also a lot of cases where you get voice stops in the orthography. It seems like there may have been an older written standard where there was no voicing, and maybe as the language changed, some scribes had voicing, and then they started using the voice consonants. But not all dialects developed voicing. So Andhro and Sekmai don't have voicing. You can compare chapa to eat and imta at home with chaba and yumda, right? And devoicing between vowels and after nasals is extremely uncommon in the world's languages because these are environments that are almost always voiced, and we expect consonants to become voiced in voiced environments. There's also a phenomenon where most manuscripts will spell initial yi or y with a long e, with the sort of the inap on the left side, where the modern language has a syllable initial e. So this is again from the Ningtolo Lampupa, from Hemchandra's facsimile, and this says Lilwa yi maruta tona pane. So was working at the source of the Iro River's water. Tona is an old way to say work, according to Singh et al., who have a lot of Auribalon forms in their dictionary. And Lilwai is an old word for the Irin or the Ireo River. But you can see here that water is clearly written as yi. I know that this word e now means blood mostly, but I think in the context, it's way more likely that it's referring to water here because most rivers don't bleed, hopefully. There's also a newly discovered manuscript, which contains a great example of this too. So this is ARC actually digitized this recently, and the custodian is named Chongtam Ibotombi. And here it says Yi Kut Sung, which means probably also my hand or and my hand. Sung is the older form of su, which means the same thing. And it's still preserved in modern phrases like amasung, which is, I guess, a formal word for and, right? And Chalia and Yashavanta Singh have written a lot about this. They also spell wo, so y otnap for modern initial o, but not always. So this text shows the difference between, between wo and o. So you have wok rampam, nangti wok pusilo. And my pronunciations, again, are just approximations. I'm sure that somebody else could do a much better job than me, but I'm just trying to pronounce it without voicing. And yeah, please don't take my pronunciations as being the only correct ways to do it. But this says only you, wok rampams, carry in the pigs. And this is from K.M. Singh's facsimile of the Loyun Basilio. So this is a pretty clear evidence that there was the letter Y used for the word for pig, which would suggest a pronunciation like wok. And this is found consistently. So in the Chaituran Kumpapa from Parat, Sarojana Lini Parat, here we have wok hui yel yamna si and then a suffix that I don't know how to pronounce necessarily. It might have been CA, but it's very clearly written with just a single letter. And Hemchandra transliterates it as just a sound y in some cases. But this means many pigs, dogs, and fowl died. And the first word is clearly pig. And they also write wu in a lot of cases. So y unap for modern u from the Loyun Basiliel. So this says wu si tapa, which probably means immortal tree. This is a sort of a prayer to a some kind of a Sylvan deity. And note that this is clearly a letter Y with a diacritic for the unap, the U sound. So here's another example from the Lelo Lampupa, which again is Hemchandra's naming for this text. I think he likes to use the as historically accurate as he thinks it is, which by writing it, for example, without voicing and a final L in the first word. And this says Pamel Wulai Sanglakle. Pamel means tree, according to Singh et al. And Wulai seems to be the ancestor of Uray, which is the word for orchid, right? And Sangba is green, Asangba. So it probably means the tree's orchid had been green over there or something like that. However, since most orchids are not green, please somebody let me know during the Q&A if you have green orchids. It seems like this might be an example of semantic change where it's called, it's where a sound becomes more specific over time. I can't remember the exact technical term, but it seems like, original word wulai, which might mean flower, because it might be composed for the words for tree and flower. So the flower of a tree may have come to mean orchid over time. And note that this is transliterated by Hemchandra with a sound wu, right? So he transliterates it as Bamel Wu Lai Sang Lak Le in the Bangla script. So wa and ya, which is also sometimes transcribed as a English letter Y in the IPA, depending on the tradition, are the non-syllabic variants of E and U, respectively. These are high vowels that have similar phonetic features. O is not a high vowel. O is usually a mid vowel in most languages. And it's plausible that no contrast between initial U and Wu and E and Yi existed, but there was a contrast between O and Wo. We don't know for sure, but this is possible because in many languages, U and E tend to pattern together. But it is unclear why scribes would have chosen to represent initial U and E as Wu and Yi if they were not actually pronounced that way. So this is something that really needs further research and explanation. Relatives of Meiteilon suggest that the spelling may indicate there was originally a consonant W in the word for pig. So these relatives are things like Proto-South Central Tibeto-Burman wok, which is almost identical to the written form that we see in Old Meiteilon. In written Burmese, they spell it as wak, but it's now pronounced something like wa. And Proto-Bodo-Garo, they write it as bwak. And in Garo, the word is wak, which is very similar in modern Garo from Meghalaya. Now for yim, which is the word for house in many cases. Did I skip that? Give me a second. Did I skip that? No, I did not. Okay, my bad. Yeah, so for modern yim, which you can compare to Magar yum, im, house, Monshang, yim, and yum. So these are languages that actually have an initial ya in the word for house, but many languages have im or once did. These are all related Tibeto-Burman languages. And in written Burmese, you have im, which is actually pronounced something like im now. In Mizo, you have in. And it seems that the proto-language would have had two related roots with u and e for house, because we see yim and yum in Meiteilon. For those of you who know Old Meiteilon, I should have included more about yim. I think I did, actually. Give me a second. My apologies. Seems I didn't. Okay, that's fine. That's fine. But there's plenty of texts that have yim. Like for example, in the Chetero Kompapa, it says in one part that kakempa yim taye, which means he settled in his house, right? Settled at home. And the word wu for tree and wu for sea, which is also attested in some texts, have less clear cognates, so it's much harder to tell if they had an initial glide consonant, right, an initial w, when compared to the word for house. But it seems like there are enough descendant languages of Proto-Tibeto-Burman that do have an initial y before a front vowel, so yi in the word for house, to suggest that maybe it was actually yim. And now we're going to get to this past tense morpheme, which is, I don't really know how to pronounce. So here is the yim, actually. I decided to put it over here. That's good. We found it. We found the house. So the past tense suffix is sometimes written as a single character. I transcribe as a long E because it's different from the normal character that's used for a coda y sound, which sort of looks like this, but kind of flipped around and sort of a little bit more square. This text says Ningtem Kakempa Yim Taye. So King Kakempa moved into his own house. That's the translation of Parat. And Yim is the Aribalong for house, as I previously mentioned, one of the words. This character clearly indicates just E in many cases. So the same character that you saw at the end of the sentence here, that's used for the past tense in settle, is also used here in the word for gold. One of the words for gold, which is choino. And you have choino sana ming, which probably means royal name. This doubling of two words that mean the same thing is very common in Aribalon texts. And Singh et al. Have choino as a Aribalon word in their dictionary. And gold can also refer to royal. So other times this past tense suffix is written as this symbol plus an additional yetnap diacritic. Note that this is not the character for the sound ya in Old Meiteilon. It's not the normal character for the sound ya, which we saw earlier many times. So here we have wata ti kie, had been speaking rudely. So wata is like a way of speaking, and wata ti is, I guess, ugly speech, right? So rude speech. And very rarely there are Aribalon texts that do write this suffix as ye. So here in the Kamnung Tongak Aronpane, again, this is Hemchandra's spelling of the name. You have Lamlel Kong Hampat Yo Rakye, which probably means something like he reached the important place Kong Hampat. And Kong Hampat is the place where the soul goes after death. And Yo is to reach. And Lamlen and Lamlel means excellent place. I lost lel here as mel. This means meliorative. That's kind of a very complex Latin word for a suffix that makes something great or makes something excellent. So it's essentially the same as Sharma, who glosses it as excellent. But it's important to note that this does not mean excellent by itself, as far as I know. So for this past tense suffix, it seems that these different spellings probably don't represent different pronunciations. It would be very statistically unlikely for a language to have three distinct suffixes that mean the same thing and have such similar phonological shapes, right? Maybe like E, EA, and ye. And it doesn't seem like there's a conditioning environment for these, but the explanation for different spelling variants is unclear. I originally wrote different scribal traditions, but it's possible that as scribes began writing more and more, because this is such a common suffix in the language, they decided to abbreviate it by just using one character to save a bit of space. There's also a lack of deaspiration in what I call Chalia's law. Now, I'm sure that other people have come up with this law first, but it's basically the second aspirated consonant, or S, in two syllables in a row deaspirates. So these are two syllables that have aspirated consonants as an onset, which is the initial consonant of the syllable. And for the purposes of this change, H counts as an aspirate because it deaspirates the following aspirates, but is not itself deaspirated. So note that this process does not apply to compounds formed after the sound change happened as well. But you can see here, si and tok become si dok, so to sacrifice oneself. But ching tok is to pull outwards. And because jing is not aspirated, it doesn't become jing dok, which would be expected if it was something like ching, right, with an extra puff of air, which is the aspiration. In some Old Meiteilon texts, there is evidence that this process had not happened yet. So from the Ningtolo Lampupa, you have Wangbal Awangna Humkat Kiingai. So well, the high wind is blowing upwards, or something like that. According to Dina Chandra Singh, Wangbal means air or wind, which he writes, according to modern pronunciation, as something like Wangban. But we know from the sound change established earlier with the voicing that this is the same word. There's also a lot of variation between final L and N, which are often in free variation. For the same word, this humkat, to blow upwards, you can compare modern day humgat. And you can see, for those of you who can read the script below, that this is a clear example of the script spelling kat and not gut. The same text actually does show the process later on, however. So you have in a phrase that I showed you before, this is the full thing. It's joino sana ming hulkipu, so forgiving a royal name. I don't know what this root hol means exactly. It seems to be maybe hunba, which is to throw, right? Hunba, or hunba, sorry. And the imperfective suffix, which Chalia calls still, is normally ki, but here it seems like maybe it was deaspirated by the aspirated quality of the H, even though H is technically not an aspirated consonant. And according to Singh et al., Ming Hun Kiba is given a name. So maybe it's an expression meaning like thrown a name or something like that. But regardless of what this root means, this is a clear example that this sound change had happened in some cases in the same text. So again, it's possible that scribes with different dialects were working on the same text, which is a royal chronicle. Maybe what I call Chalia's law happened at different times in different Old Meiteilon speech varieties. Or in the time between the folio on Hemchandra's page 18 and the folio on Hemchandra's page 26 were created. That's always possible because presumably writing these back then took quite a long time. And maybe the scribes were working on a number of things, and possibly it took maybe a few years to complete the entire thing. Alternatively, there was an earlier written standard crystallized without Chalia's law orthographically indicated, and as their speech was changing, the later scribes included it because it felt natural. It was the way they pronounced the language, so they adapted it. This is something we see in the written history of every language. And of course, further research is required. There's also medial consonants in the script. So there's special diacritics for indicating medials. This is Yumjao Singh's chart of medials in the script. I don't know if you can read it. It's a bit hard to read. But you can see that here we have kwa, which that little triangle to the left of the character is a w sound, a w medial between the initial consonant and the vowel a. So here we have the word quack, which means crow, still means crow, in Parat's Chetero Kumpapa. And you can see it's written with this big triangle to the left of the kok consonant character. So now we're going to get into a really interesting one. The word that's now pronounced when reciting old texts as huyen or huyel is written with the following. This is a hak yitnap with a w medial, which unfortunately I don't know the word for it in Meiteilon. But then we have a lailon sum. So it looks like it should be pronounced as huel or something like that, maybe huen. This is a really interesting one because almost every source I've consulted pronounces this as huyel or huyen. But if this was actually pronounced as huyel, then it seems that the same diacritic should indicate ui in the word for crow. So maybe kuyak, but I don't think crow has ever been pronounced as kuyak. And that would imply a change from a consonant plus ui to a consonant wa, so that huyel would be impossible, because remember, sound change is regular. So it seems like we need a better explanation or a different explanation for why this set of characters is consistently transliterated as huyel, the one on the left. So it could be the case that the same diacritic was used in different ways, but this would create a lot of confusion for understanding, and the application to the word for war would be arbitrary. So this is kind of a post hoc explanation, right? That this was just used in different ways, but the odds of this being used in one of the two words that we're examining would be incredibly low if it could have just been like a random sample of words. So why not any other word? Why not any other sequence? It would be completely arbitrary to use this for medial wa and ui. And it makes little sense to have a medial diacritic for ui, given how uncommon monosyllabic root structure for the most part. So a basic root having multiple syllables is almost impossible. Can everybody still hear me? Yeah. Tell me in the chat if you can still hear me.
You were not audible for like half a minute, so you could just
For half a
repeat
minute.
again.
Okay. Should I go back? Yeah, I'll just repeat this one slide. Is that the slide that
Yeah,
kind of okay, all right. So yeah, sorry about that. So maybe the same diacritic was used in different ways, but this would create lots of confusion for understanding. And the application to the word for war would be arbitrary. So why not any other word? If you're taking a sample of random words and deciding I'm going to use this medial diacritic for wa in quack and any other sequence in any other word, it would seem like the odds of any individual word showing up would be very low. And it makes little sense to have a medial diacritic for ui, as in huyel, given how uncommon it is in the language. And the diacritic is never used for ui elsewhere, as far as I know. Ui is not that uncommon, but it's definitely less common than wa, right? So it's more likely then that the word was originally pronounced something like huel, and then became huyel. It's also more likely because Tibeto-Burman languages have a monosyllabic root structure. So almost every language in the Tibeto-Burman family has single syllables that form roots for nouns and verbs. And then a lot of them add other elements like suffixes or prefixes to distinguish meaning. Now, it could be a compound, but I think that explanation doesn't work. So I looked at all of the possible things that huyel could be, and the most plausible one is poison distribution. But I think that doesn't work because, so Singh et al. Write huyen or huyel as this in the Bangla script with a short u, which implies a level tone. And apparently this still occurs in some modern compounds. I've never heard this word, but someone should let me know if this exists. This is huyen lan shokpam, which apparently means battlefield in the modern language. Singh et al. have an indication when something is an Ariba loan word, and this doesn't have that indication. But the word for poison in their dictionary is spelled as hu with a long u, which implies falling tone, which indicates that huyel cannot be a compound from the word for poison because it has a level tone in the first syllable and not a falling tone. So instead, it seems like we have to get from huel to huyel or huyen. I think it's possible if we have two steps. So if it was originally huel and then it became huel, u is the syllabic version of wa and would be a very natural choice to break up the initial cluster. And it's a common sound change called epenthesis to add a vowel to break up initial consonant clusters. It's a similar process when, for example, Spanish speakers will say something like "street" in English instead of street. And then the second change would be huel to huyel. So in Singh et al. And Sharma, we basically have no entries that have the sequence way. From the random distribution hypothesis, it's unlikely that Wei would just be non-existent in the language. And that highly suggests that Wei became something else because we would expect roughly an equal distribution of consonants and vowels. So historical Wei to Ye would explain the abundance of initial Ye as well, and would also explain Huel to Huyel. But of course, more examples are needed to confirm this. I would be very happy if someone could come up with some or help me work on this. There's also clusters and some loanwords. So here, this is a loanword from Burmese. So it says Awa, Kyong, Sapa, Haipa, Ama, Toklak Ye. And it means a builder who knew how to build temples arrived from Awa. This word Kyong is definitely a loanword from Burmese, and I'll show you why on the next slide. So it has a very well-accepted etymology. This is from Old Burmese klong, which means temple. And the text itself suggests that the word originates from Awa, because the builder who knows how to make these temples is coming from there. And the modern Meiteilon form is now pronounced as Giyong, and I'm pretty sure some of you went there the other day to a Giyong, and that's very serendipitous. In modern Burmese, the main word for temple is still one syllable. It's pronounced something like chao. That suggests that whenever it was probably borrowed as a single syllable because it was a single syllable in the source language. And it is clearly written here with the diacritic for a medial ya in the folio from Parat. And it's not written as kiyo, right? So you can see it as the second word here. So since kyong was likely borrowed as a single syllable, there was probably a sound change where initial kyo became ki. So if you can remember that e is just the syllabic variant of ya, e is a commonly epenthesized vowel as well, according to Lyle Campbell. More examples are needed to confirm this hypothesis too, but it would make a lot of sense to epenthesize an u before wa and an e before ya. It seems like there may have been just a single process in the development of Old Meiteilon where they epenthesized a vowel that was similar to a following glide or the same, except syllabic. So you have kya becoming kia and hua becoming hua, right? So in conclusion, it's highly evident that Meiteilon underwent some phonetic and phonological changes over the period of its written history. This is something that we would expect for any language with a longer written record. It seems to me maybe that the difficulty of understanding Aribalon texts for modern readers might be partially attributed to some of these changes. This is why, for example, Hemchandra needs to provide translations into the modern language for his texts, which are very helpful to me, especially. A lot more work needs to be done to find further examples for these sound changes. What I have presented here are just suggestions. I would be very happy if any of you would prove me wrong in the future. Please do it. I really think there's a lot of interesting things to figure out, and it would be nice if more people were working on this. Some older forms can be shown to be more similar to Tibeto-Burman languages. So wok, pig, and written Burmese wak, which is now pronounced as wat, and South Central wok. This may suggest that ancestral Meiteilon underwent a common development with Burmese and South Central, but more work is necessary. But notably, the Tibetan word for pig is pak, which this pa is also a labial sound like wa, this sort of aspirated p sound, the voiceless labial aspirated stop. But it's notably different than wa, and we would expect languages that have wa to be more closely related. So here are my references. I have 7 pages of references. I'd be happy to send them to anybody who would like to see them. And thank you so much.
All right, that was a brilliant, really exciting presentation, Josiah. We're gonna take a 2 minutes break, and feel free to write to Josiah if you have more questions and collaborations. Yeah,
I'll just put
bye.
my email right now in the chat.
Yeah, yeah, do that.
There we go. Thanks. Thank you very much. Bye.
All right, bye. Good night. Good day, everyone.
Yeah, have a good day. Goodbye.